My name is Michelle Pope, and I'm the Serials Government Documents Librarian at Loyola University New Orleans Law Library. This event is co-sponsored by the Technical Services SIS Resource Management Committee and the Government Documents SIS. Today's presentation is titled FDLP in a Digital Era, Part 1, an overview of GPO catalog records and how libraries work with them. Our speakers are both GPO specialists. Ashley Dahlen, Senior Outreach Librarian, and Oksana Osbourne, Metadata Integrity Librarian. Welcome.
Thank you. So again, my name is Ashley Dahlen. I'm an outreach librarian at GPO. Oksana, do you want to say anything real quick?
Sure. I'm Oksana. I am a metadata integrity librarian. So I do cataloging stuff. I'm just here to support Ashley.
Yes, so Oksana is actually the cataloger subject matter expert here in this case, and she really helped me flesh out my slides. So if I misspeak in any way, shape, or form about how GPO catalogs, Oksana is going to interrupt me and correct me because I really don't want to put out bad information. So let me go ahead and get started and share my screen. Okay, are you seeing my slide and like not the presenter view of the slide?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I just wanted to really quickly give an overview. This became a two-part webinar, and it was originally pitched as just a simple request for they saw that we had rolled out FDLP Data Manager, or FDM, and that people were able to download GPO metadata really easily, and that there's some new creative ways that you can tap into this metadata to do really cool things, like help you with your weeding projects, or help you with your inventorying, or helping to find SUDOC call numbers if you have LC, that sort of thing. And when we were talking about I'm sorry, I got to close out my email. When we were talking about, how this program would shape up, at the same time, we had a news alert go out that said Marchive was suspending or ceasing their services at the end of December. And that threw everyone, or a lot of libraries, for a loop, because that's how they were getting their GPO cataloging records. So this is all kind of converging together, where there's a lot of people who are suddenly starting to look at GPO catalog records and are starting to notice things that they never noticed before, because maybe Marchive took care of some things for them. They paid Marchive to take care of some things, or as they rethink their cataloging workflows, they're starting to wonder what's going on with GPO catalog records, because there are some things that people have expectations of, and it just doesn't align with what's actually available. So we sort of evolved this program into a two-parter. So part one is going to be basically, we need you to understand the scope and the goal of GPO cataloging. We need you to understand how cataloging standards have evolved over time, just like everyone else. We need you to understand when GPO goes in and updates records. We need you to understand the CGP, which is our catalog, the catalog of US government publications. We need you to understand that there are differences in the sources of GPO records, and the data that you get out of each of those sources may differ just a little bit. We need you to understand, or at least think about, cataloging considerations. So if you're rethinking your workflow right now because of the end of Marchive, or because it's just time for you all to do that, there's some major hiccups to rethinking your workflow that we want you to consider before you decide on a course of action. And then I've got a bunch of links to training and tutorials for you, and we're going to talk very high level about some of the special projects, for example, like weeding projects and things that you can do with GPO catalog metadata. But again, to preface, we started out with how do you work with GPO metadata, but we realized very quickly that You have to actually understand GPO catalog metadata before you can dive into your project, because your source of your catalog records is going to make or break you. Okay, so GPO does a lot of cataloging. We do that through not the FDLP. So the Superintendent of Documents is in charge of many programs. One of the programs is the Federal Depository Library Program, or FDLP. But the other program where we get the catalog records from, that's actually comes out of the Cataloging and Indexing Program. And we usually just say C&I, and some people think that we're saying C-N-I, but we're actually saying C&I, so cataloging and indexing. And the statutory obligation there is that we are to prepare and publish a comprehensive index of every federal document issued or published by a department, bureau, or office, not confidential in nature, regardless of format. So the scope of that content is actually larger technically than the scope of the FDLP, which is a little bit more constrained, but catalog records come out of the C&I program is what you need to know. Our overall goal with that is to get that comprehensive and authoritative national bibliography of US government publications, because we really want to increase the visibility and use of those information products. And we want to develop a premier destination for information searchers. This is kind of what it boils down to, though. And I think this is kind of what makes GPO a little bit different than any other vendor that you may work with. Now, I don't have a lot of experience working with other vendors because I've been at GPO for 16 years now, going on 17. And it's just been a while. But I get the feeling that when you work with most vendors for content, it's not quite a one and done, but you know, you profile for something and you get new records, but we don't quite have the same emphasis on historic stuff like GPO does. So let me describe to you what this national bibliography is like, that everything is kind of converging. All of the GPO projects are all converging on this national bibliography. Just like everyone else, we have our daily stuff that we are constantly taking in. So there's the daily cataloging and indexing that's going on, as well as the FDLP acquisitions. So we still do send out some tangible paper format documents in boxes to our depository libraries, although it's much smaller than what it used to be, but it's still ongoing. So we have that. We also have our historic shelf list transcription project, right? You had a catalog back in the day, we had a catalog. Our catalog was pretty large because we were cataloging the output of the United States federal government to the best of our ability. So it was a large project. We digitized it. We've been transcribing those cards and putting them into brief catalog records. We have the historic MOCAT transcription project. Same thing. I'll talk about the monthly catalog in a bit, but monthly catalog has very brief bibliographic information. We've been transcribing that stuff and putting it into brief catalog records. We have cooperative cataloging projects. This is a huge area where we are working with agencies or other libraries. We're collaborating together to create a really nice, good, enhanced catalog record of some sort. We have internal record conversion projects that we're still working on, where we're migrating off of legacy systems. In my mind, when I think about this, what pops into my mind is we're still getting serials recorded as items in our catalog records. So you'll see ongoing serials, item level stuff going on. And then we also have this huge area of unreported publications. We used to call unreported publications fugitives, but essentially what it is a federal agency didn't tell us that they were going to print for something. They just printed the stuff on their own, and they maybe mailed a couple copies out to whomever they wanted to, but we were totally out of the loop on it. And so, you know, 10 years later, a century later, you all are cataloging your stuff and you're going, wait a minute, this thing has no catalog record. What's going on? So you let us know and we say, yep, that's in the C&I program. So we create a catalog record for something that had been unreported, and it's basically it had slipped through the cracks, but now we at least have it in the national bibliography. So again, you'll notice that a good chunk of those projects relate to older stuff or ongoing projects, and a fraction of what we're doing is actually dealing with new stuff that's ongoing. All right, so we have many different cataloging standards that we have used at GPO over time, and this may impact whatever metadata project you may be embarking upon. Obviously, between 1895 and 2004, we had the printed monthly catalog, what we fondly call a MOCAT. That has been digitized, but it's not particularly easy to use in a PDF format because they're rather large files. Yes, there is a community commons agreement to use the ProQuest monthly catalog set, and we are looking at it. And if you're interested in that project, just keep paying attention to GPO updates. Usually you'll see it at the spring DLC and the fall DLC conferences. You'll see updates of that. We began machine readable cataloging or MARC cataloging in July of 1976. That was in the AACR standard. We began using AACR2 in October of 1980. This is key here. And I was trying to put little key symbols next to important things in my slides throughout this presentation because these are things that I'm being asked about quite a bit of late, okay? Single record approach was used by GPO until September of 2008. That means that if there's one catalog record that covered the paper format, the microfiche format, and the online format, or whatever formats actually existed. So we had one catalog record for all formats. This is creating a problem for some of you who are on the newer catalog systems or have a new discovery layer and your systems are having problems filtering those records correctly. We began doing separate records in October of 2008, and I gave you a link there to the separate record policy, and I'll make sure that you all have access to the slides after this is over. But yeah, that October 2008 date is going to be critical for some of you because the metadata that you want to work with is you're going to want to have the separate catalog records potentially. We first experimented with RDA in 2011, and we began full implementation of the RDA cataloging standard in April of 2013. A key part of that for many of you is going to be those 336, 337, and 338 fields, which records essentially, is this an online resource or is this a paper format? What is going on? What's this format here? Many of you have discovery layers where it needs those fields to know how to run the filters on the left side of your discovery layer. I will say though that we did go back and apply those fields to non-RDA records. So if you go into the CGP and you look at our catalog records, you will see that the 33X fields are there for pretty much all of our records. If we couldn't make a determination that was definitive, we didn't include that field. So there's a couple of cases where you may see one or two of the 33X fields, but you won't see all three. So just be aware of that limitations. We have found that people needed to understand when GPO would go in and update a catalog record. So I gave you a link there at the top there to a general statement on when we do updates to records, but I will tell you right now, in general, we do make changes to records. We will change the publication frequency, we'll add variant titles, we'll close out serials and integrating resource records as is needed. We also do correct errors that we find in records. And we authenticate higher priority records for PCC. And I gave you a link to how we define higher priority records. Key for you is we will create separate records for each format, meaning we will split the record out, one for each format, if it's required in the course of cataloging, the regular course of cataloging. So for example, if we're looking at a Conser serial and integrating resource record, and we need to work on it at that point in time, we would separate out the record. And there's again, that link to that separate record policy. We do a lot of work related to authorities. That work is performed as needed. It's performed monthly and it's performed semi-annually. So when I talk about authorities, what I'm talking about is we will add newly created subject headings. And this one is key here. We will update outdated subject headings. And I say that this is key because I've worked with a couple of libraries now who are trying to retrospectively or retroactively create digital collections on particular subjects. And I would call attention to the DEI subject and LGBTQ topics. So it's important for you to understand that we did go through and update all of the old subject headings 2020, was it 2020, 2022? I can't remember which year. One of those early 2020s, we went through and we did update those subject headings. But we're doing that kind of work all the time across the board for our content. We do remove or replace inaccurate subject headings. We do replace name access points that have been revised in the authority file. So for example, the federal government has a lot of corporate bodies that are changing their names all the time. We close dates off, things like that. We replace unauthorized name access points with authorized names that were added to the authority files after the bib record was created. And then we also go through and we add authorized access points for series, like those 8XX fields when a series was added to the authority file after the bib record was created, which happens a lot in the federal government. We also do updates with regards to linked data. And this is kind of a, you either love them or you hate them is what I'm picking up on when I talk with libraries, in particular URIs or Uniform Resource Identifiers. There's a subfield 0 field for URIs in the 1, 6, 7, and 8XX mark fields. We add URIs on a monthly basis to the records that are new to the CGP, and we add them on a semi-annual basis to all records in the CGP. When it comes to working with catalog records that are in OCLC, when we pull them over to the CGP, we are going to retain any subfield 1 URIs in the 1XX and the 7XX fields. And these aren't URIs, but they are linked data of sorts. The 77X and the 78X, those are, if you have a catalog record, say for a paper format, it's going to have a linker field that tells you, hey, there's this record over here for the online version. And then the online format record would have a linker field that would say, hey, there's this print record over here. So it's a linking field between different formats of a publication, different languages of a publication, and it also links you to preceding and succeeding publications for that particular title. Those linking entries are manually added. So the main takeaway from this slide is we do a lot of updates to our URIs and to our linked things, but some of these things are done manually and some of these things are done more or less on a scheduled basis. We're constantly making updates. Here's kind of a flip of the script here. These are things that essentially we're not updating. And so again, I got 2 keys on here because we get a lot of questions about this at GPO. The main thing to understand is that we can only provide a URL to a resource if it is an official digital file. So if we have a catalog record and it's a paper format and it says, hey, there's an online resource over here, that would be that 77X or 78X linker field that links you out to the other version. If that other catalog record that we're linking to happens to be, say, out in OCLC, and that record just happens to link to an unofficial version, we'll keep the linker field that takes you out to that OCLC record or wherever it lives, even if it's an unofficial version. But if we are pulling a catalog record into our realm, into the CGP, we can't retain any link or 856 URL to an unofficial publication. So that will have to get removed. And the cases where you see this happening the most is everyone wants links to HATI. And they wonder why when they get records from our sources, they don't see any links to HATI, but they look at the same record in OCLC and the link to HATI is there. And that's why. It's because when we pull it into our system, we can't keep those unofficial resource links, but we can keep the linker fields going out to the records. Slightly different flavor, but it does relate to online resources. I have to explain how the GPO Perl server works very briefly. Bear with me here. So you have an online resource and a bibliographic record here, and we have a link to that online resource, and it's called a persistent URL or PURL. Persistent URL. The idea is that we create a persistent link. It's got the https:// perl.gpo.gov something. That link is static. It does not change. What is going on is you click on the Perl and you hit GPO's Perl server, and GPO's Perl server says, oh, you're trying to get to the 2017 annual report of this thing. and the Perl server is going to redirect you to wherever that resource actually resides. And the idea is that we may link to GovInfo. We may link to a backup copy that we happen to have at GPO. We may link you to the federal agency's website. We may link you to a web archive crawl that was done by an official federal entity or something like that. But if we need to change where that resource is redirected to, if the resource changes its location, we'll just change where the Perl routes you to. You don't have to change your catalog record. The Perl remains, the link itself remains the same. But when you hit GPO server, we're just going to change where you get routed to, okay? So Perls, you don't need to update or maintain. We maintain the directing or the routing of it, but it's not a catalog record maintenance thing that has to go on. Some of you will notice though that there are links in catalog records that are not Perls. They're just plain old URLs. In older catalog records, you're going to find them in the 530 field and you're going to find them in the 538 field. In the newer catalog records, you're going to find them in the 856 indicator for blank subfield U area, which is to make it long story short, you're going to see an 856 Perl and you're going to see an 856 URL. Those links are what they call the address at the time of Perl creation. And we started doing that shortly after 2010. And the reason we did that was because in 2010, we had a Perl server crash. So you all had your catalog records, you clicked on a Perl, you hit our Perl server, and the Perl server was dead and it couldn't redirect you to wherever the content actually resided. That was a problem. The content was perfectly safe. It was sitting over here. It just happened to be that the Perl server was down, and it took us a little bit of time to get that Perl server set up again. And in the meantime, when that server was still down, people were saying, geez, if we just had the URL, we could always have tried it to see if it was still at the original location online. Or barring that, if it wasn't still there, we could at least have plugged it into the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine to see if anyone anywhere had done a web archive crawl of that website, and we might have been able to have gotten to that content. And that was a fair point. You're right. People might have been able to make use of the old URL, even if the content was still not there, because you can use things like the Internet Archive. So we said, okay, we will add those links to the 856 indicator for blank subfield U, and we never intended to update those links. That is why it is labeled address at the time of Perl creation. We're not going to update those links. We never wanted to. It would be maddening because every time we had to do an update, then you would have to refresh your records, and everyone across the country who had used the same record would have to refresh their records, and it was not going to work. So those URLs are in there for you can check the link to see if it still works, or you can plug it into the Internet Archive. But if you don't like them, if it's confusing your end users, you can go ahead and you can delete them, or you can remove them from the public view so that it's still in the catalog record. The librarians can see them in the MARC record, but the end user doesn't see it, so it doesn't confuse them. So I just wanted to point out, because we do get asked about this, why are we not updating those links? That is why we're not updating those links. They're there as a backup to a backup. Now, I will say this in our defense. The GPO Perl server has been completely set up in a new host site. It's got multiple redundancies. We've actually done rollover testing, and you all didn't notice anything was going on because the rollover happened so seamlessly. Nobody knew that we were actually operating off of an alternate server. So I have faith that knock on wood, the Perl server is not going to crash again, but if it does for some reason, you do have the original URLs there that you can make use of. All right. GPO does use OCLC records for copy cataloging when we need to. I gave you a link there to the policy on adapting records. What we do is we find a record on OCLC, we're going to evaluate that record for its accuracy, and we're going to adapt it to fit into our standards before we bring it into the CGP. We will convert a record to the RDA standard if we intend to authenticate that record as PCC level, which is kind of like the highest level you can catalog at. But do keep in mind that we can't convert a record to RDA if we don't actually have the item in our hand or a surrogate in our hand, which makes it a little bit difficult because as you can see, we're teleworkers and we also at GPO don't have a library. So it makes it a little bit difficult sometimes to get our hands on surrogates. All right, so I have talked about the goal of GPO cataloging, what resources GPO will catalog and what we will not, what cataloging standards GPO has cataloged in, and I've talked about when we will go in and we will modify or update a record. So where is our cataloging officially found? Well, it is found in the CGP, or the Catalog of U.S. Government Publications, which is the finding tool for federal publications that includes descriptive information for historic and current publications, as well as direct links to the full document when available. And I mentioned a little bit earlier, but for the most part, we catalog in OCLC and we bring our records into the CGP. There are some special projects that I'll talk about where we create the records in the CGP and then they go out to OCLC, but that's pretty far in the weeds. This is perhaps the most important slide if you're trying to work with GPO metadata. And that is because our metadata is almost always going to come from the CGP. And so this is what the CGP actually has. We have catalog records from July 1976 to present, and that includes catalog records in the AACR, AACR2, RDA standards. And we do have some basic records that do not adhere to those standards. We have select records from pre-1976 resource catalog projects. So think of it this way. We have gone in and there are pockets of catalog records for content that predates 1976. We have newly digitized but older resources. So this is content that was shipped out prior to 1976. But somebody went through and officially digitized it. So we created an online format record for this digital resource that just happens to be an older publication. So there's pockets of these older publications that have been newly digitized and they're newer catalog records in the newer standards, if that makes sense. We have pockets of content in the CGP that are coming from agencies or particular topics. Those examples would be like the Fraser collection that we have and the NIST work that we did. They're projects that we worked with them to create these catalog records, or we adapted some metadata to create records with them. We have content in the CGP that is within the scope of the CNI program, but is not within the scope of the FDLP program, although the overlap is pretty strong. We have content that is in the scope of the FDLP. Paper copies do exist, but the only FDLP version that exists that was quote unquote distributed to depositories was the online format. And I say distributed, I put it in quotes because we don't physically distribute an online format publication to you, but we do disseminate it via use of the item number to you all if you profile for that item number. So an example is probably the easiest way to explain that. Congressional Research Service reports, high quality research reports, like a jewel of any collection because of how rich they are in terms of the research that the investigators put into those reports. Awesome reports. They existed all over Washington, D.C. in paper format because they were printed for the Hill and for whatever somebody commissioned them to be created, somebody on the Hill did. And so they exist in paper format, but they were not within the scope of the FDLP. But they did go back and say, okay, the online versions here can be publicly available. So once the online versions became publicly available, they fell into the scope of the FDLP. So you see FDLP material in one format, but the paper version is not in the scope of the FDLP. You also see things like the Law Library of Congress historical reports is another example of that. Within the CGP, you're going to start seeing a lot more of this, but batch created records. My favorite example is the congressional bills, where we never were able to catalog congressional bills before because of the volume of them created. But because we, GPO is a printing plant, but also we work with digital stuff, we load the congressional bills into GovInfo, which is a database for full text content, right? When we ingest that material into GovInfo, it creates a metadata file. And so they took the metadata file and they're now creating MARC catalog records off of that metadata. They're brief catalog records. They'll never be a full catalog record, but we got enough elements that we can create a pretty brief catalog record, and it's kind of cool. You'll see those records in the CGP. We have preliminary acquisitions records, like you all know what that is. It's, you know, we see something's coming through in the pipeline, so we create a provisional acquisition record, and eventually it will be fully cataloged. And then we have a bunch of basic records in the CGP, and that's a bibliographic record that we say is at encoding level 3. It's basically, it's a very abbreviated catalog record. It gives us sufficient degree of access to a publication. Sometimes those basic records are done. They will never go beyond a basic record. And sometimes we just put the basic record in there so that you have a discovery point, but we know that we're going to circle back and create a full record later on. All right, so knowing timeframes of what we've cataloged and when we cataloged, knowing that we had cataloged to different standards over time, knowing that we go in and we do updates to catalog records more or less constantly, knowing that we work with pockets of older material, that's going to impact you when you're rethinking your cataloging workflow or when you're working on projects that utilize GPO catalog metadata. So I wanted to draw attention to various sources of GPO cataloging records. I told you that the CGP is where you get our records. You don't typically go into the CGP and say, you can't export it in like a .mrc format and pull it into your catalog. It's a discovery tool. It's a catalog just like your catalog is. But you can't really export it and develop collections based off of your search results in the CGP. You can go into the new titles list and you can see, you know, an HTML report of all the new titles, and you can spot the OCLC numbers. And from there, you can, you know, use OCLC connection client to copy catalog based off the OCLC number. But be that as it may, that's the CGP. You can get your catalog records through Z3950 if you have that protocol set up, where basically your catalog talks to our catalog and you zap the records over based on that protocol. You can use the GitHub repositories. So GPO has posted catalog records. We call it the CGP on GitHub, but there's actually multiple repositories in GitHub at this point in time. There's some subject collections like geography collections. There's some monthly records. There's the entirety of the CGP. If you wanted to download the entire CGP, you could. They're available in GitHub. Those are extracted from the CGP. There's FDLP Data Manager, or FDM. That's a newer tool that we rolled out last year. It has the entire CGP loaded in it too. So the first 4 bullets are all CGP or derived from the CGP, and those are GPO records, okay? You can also get GPO records through vendors or utility, the most obvious being OCLC. But there's a catch, and this is something that surprised me recently, and it only came up because people are starting to rethink their workflow now that Marchive has ended. I kept getting questions from people saying, you've got this wonky number in the 001 field. And I was like, what's the 001 field? And I looked at, it's the local number. The Mark 001 field is the local system number. If you get your catalog records from a CGP, the CGP, or from Z3950, or from GitHub, or from FDM, the local system number is going to be the CGP system number. If you get the same record from OCLC, the local system number is going to be the OCLC number. So depending on where you pull your records from, you may have different metadata elements. And people just hadn't really thought about it before because Marchive was automatically deleting the 001 field, knowing that when your library loaded those records in, your local system would automatically create its own system number. Or Marchive was copying the 035 field, which is the OCLC number, into the 001 field, because that's what your preference for the local system number was. So Marchive was just doing that work for you, but now that Marchive is done, you're just now figuring this out. So keep in mind, your source of your catalog records is going to impact potentially your metadata. We have noticed when people are trying to rethink their cataloging workflow that there are a handful of stumbling blocks that are going to make or break your decision. So this is what we have learned in the last couple of months, is your workflow is going to be dependent on whether or not you need catalog records broken out by your item selection profile, whether or not you need your catalog records broken out by new and changed records, whether you need records for newer publications only, whether you are in a consortium, or whether or not you are already an OCLC, a metadata subscription service subscriber. So let's go over these really quickly. If you need catalog records based on your item selection profile, whether it's because you're trying to rethink your cataloging workflow, or whether it's because you're trying to create a shelf list, or you're trying to retrospectively catalog things, just be aware that OCLC can configure records based on your selection profile, your current selection profile, or it can give you all the tangible and your online resources. You can turn on a knowledge base essentially if you want to. If you're getting catalog records from the CGP on GitHub, those records are going to be provided by project, by subject, or by month, whatever file folder you go into. Those record sets are going to contain whatever is in that record. There is no customization by your selection profile. So if you need records based on selection profile, GitHub is not your place to go. FDM will get you whatever catalog records you query for. So if you want to get all the records for a given month, that's fine. If you want to get all the records for a given SUDOC stem, that's fine. If you want to get all the online format records for a particular agency, whatever your query is whatever is going to be exported. That does include running a query for records based off your current selection profile. It doesn't know what you selected 2 years ago, but it knows what you select now. If you need catalog records based on your selection profile, you do need to keep one thing in mind. And that is that all of that functionality is enabled is based on unfortunately, the item number. So right now, GPO does not include item numbers in all catalog records. And I'll give you the list there of was it 5 bullet points there of when we will not use an item number in a catalog record. But what it boils down to is we started using item numbers in the early 1940s. If the publication shipped out prior to that point, there's no item numbers in it because they didn't even exist at that era. So if you're trying to retrospectively or retroactively catalog older material in your collection, you're not going to be able to do it by item number necessarily, okay? That's the main takeaway. Another consideration when you're working on or with catalog records is we have discovered that some catalog systems require you to split apart new catalog records from changed catalog records. Some systems, when you have a record set, you pull it in, it will be like, okay, that's great. We've uploaded 55 new catalog records and we've uploaded 22 catalog records, but it has a match point on something that's already in this catalog here. So you need to review it and say whether to overlay it, yes or no. So some catalog systems appear to be able to do that, but some catalog systems flat out require that you split them apart before you ingest them. You can configure OCLC if you're working with OCLC to get your records to split those records apart by new and changed in advance. If you're working with GitHub, yes, you can do it. At the moment, you can download, if you're in the monthly record sets, that is, you can download all of the records for that month. You can download all of the all of the new records. You can download all of the new online format records, and you can download all of the new tangible format records. That's a recent change that they made to split it out by format. You can also download all of the changed records, all of the online format changed records, and all of the tangible format changed records. There's also a spreadsheet, I've just thrown this in here. There's a spreadsheet of all of the catalog records that have been deleted from the CGP. So if you want to, you can go in and see that. If you're going to use FDM though, unfortunately right now you cannot split apart new from changed. So I can tell you right now, about an hour and 20 minutes ago, we loaded a tutorial to on FDLP.gov, and basically, I wrote it so that whether you get your catalog records from FDM or from GitHub, wherever you get them from, get your record set. I walk you through how to split it apart and mark edit so that you can, it takes like less than a minute once you know how to do the workflow. It's not hard at all, but it is another step that you have to contend with if you need the files split apart. All right, another consideration that we have seen people lament about is whether or not you need records based on a publication date. We have found that many libraries do not want records for older publications or for older publications that were just digitized. And that's a sizable chunk of the work that we do. We are going back and we are cataloging pockets of materials that are older, or we are cataloging a newly digitized stuff that is older. And many people are like, don't do that. I've already weeded it from my collection. It's outside the scope of my collection. My users don't want this older stuff. And that's okay. You know your users. Marchive had a service where they could limit records to just the new publications, and you could define what that time period was that you were interested in. They were filtering the records based off the MARC 008 field, the 7 through 10 character positions. It was an imprecise workflow though. For monographs, if you think about it, the MARC 008 publication date field is going to reflect probably a different date that was covered in the publication. His example would be, excuse me, the GPO annual report for 2024. The publication year is going to be 2025, right? You can't issue, you can't produce or publish an annual report in the year being covered. So it's going to be offset by a year. So there's a little bit of an issue there. For serials and integrating resources, only the beginning date was considered when Marchive was filtering out record sets. So if you said you were only interested in publications that were dated 2000 to present, that's fine. But if the 008 position said 19 UU or 1990 or whatever, the start of the publication, even if it's still an active serial, the start of the publication preceded what you were interested in, your window. So they wouldn't give you that earlier material. You can also find publication dates in the 260 and the 264 subfield C, but they are inconsistently used. So the 008 field is typically the best, most consistent way of identifying the date of the publication. There's only one known way at present to go in and filter catalog records by the publication year, and that is to do it in MARC edit using regular expressions. And so you have to basically pull your record set into MARC edit, split it apart by the publication year, and then from there you can load that into your ILS. And again, about an hour and 20 minutes ago, I loaded a tutorial that walks you through how to do that. We are unaware at the present of anyone else that is able to provide that service. OCLC is not able to do it, and none of the other vendors that we've heard of have been able to do it yet. All right, some other cataloging considerations. If you all are a part of a consortium, we have not found an easy way to work with consortia holdings. Usually most consortia have a rule of you load the bib record once and then everyone attaches their holdings to that bib record. If you're going to work with OCLC, they don't have a way of working in a consortial environment. So that's something that you're going to have to talk about definitely with your consortia to figure out what's the best way of doing it, whether you're going to have one entity load all the bib records and then everyone else goes in and attaches it manually, or how are you going to figure it out? Alma Primo users, be advised that we have heard through the grapevine that libraries have expressed concerns about the quality of the records coming from the community zone. We have heard that they've turned them on, and some people have actually gone as far as to turn it back off again because they did not like what they were seeing. So just be aware of that. You might want to talk with other Alma Primo users to see if they turned that knowledge base on. Also, do you have an OCLC cataloging and metadata subscription service? If you already have one of those, you are already covered in terms of cost. There's 2 options that you have to be able to work with OCLC to acquire GovDocs records. So let me go over them. If you are already an OCLC subscriber, you can get your custom record sets based on your FDLP selection profile. I gave you a link to the request form for how to get those GovDocs collections, and I gave you a link on how to customize that record set to get specific notes and set your configure your collection settings and how to edit the records, things like that. Excuse me. If you are on OCLC, you also have the option of turning on the knowledge base records. So I gave you a link there to the documentation page. There's 2 collections you can turn on. You can say, get me all of the electronic US GovDocs, or you can get all the non-electronic GovDocs. It is a self-service setup. If you want to, on top of that, you can also enable MARC record delivery, which means you have access to the knowledge base content, all of it, but you also have local catalog records holdings set. Just be advised that you're creating duplicates potentially there. So you might want to be careful about testing stuff to make sure that records actually display the way you want them to. All right, so everything that I just talked about is kind of, I should say everything, but a good chunk of what I just talked about, the key stuff, is outlined here. So down the left side, we have the source of the GPO catalog record. And then we have the 2 main hiccups that people have to get over when they're talking about their workflows or about the source of the records. The first hiccup is knowing whether or not you can get the records based on the selection profile, yes or no. And the second consideration is whether or not you need the records split out by new and changed catalog records. So I laid it all out here. I would say the main thing to take away from here is you see that there are 3 blue asterisks. Those are the CGP records. So it's the CGP on GitHub, Z3950 or FDM. Those are official GPO sources, although technically the CGP is the official source, but they're all CGP or derived from the CGP. We have control over those records. Once the records are out on OCLC, though, we don't have control over them in quite the same way. So you're going to see things on OCLC records that you won't see on our records or anything derived from our records. Oops. All right, so we have a lot of libraries that are trying to figure out how to maximize or best improve the search interface for their catalog and discovery layers. So this is the 2023 biennial survey data. I distilled it down to just law and court libraries. Running down the first column there is the library catalog system, and running across the top is the discovery layer. And then it's just a count of the number of law and court libraries that are on that combination of catalog and discovery system. So I apologize for the color coding. I'm a color coder. The redder it is, the hotter it is, or the more popular it is, the bluer it is, the colder it is, or the least popular. So you can see here that for law and court libraries, there's 51 libraries reported that they were not on any discovery layer. 50 libraries reported that they were on the Alma Primo combination. So if you're in a situation and you're trying to figure out like how would we make it work for ourselves, and you want to know some peer libraries that may be on the same catalog discovery layer combination, contact us. We'll let you know who some options might be, okay? In some cases, you may only see like 1 library is on Circe Dynex and they're on some sort of an open source discovery layer. Sorry, you're probably not going to find anyone else on an open source discovery layer quite like that. But we might be able to poke around and find a non-law or non-court library that might be on the similar combination as you are. Right, so I said I'd get you guys some training and tutorials. If you're interested in using FDM, there's an hour-long recording that was done a while back when we went over the entire tool from beginning to end, all the different modules. The different modules may help you depending on what you're trying to do with the metadata, because FDM has catalog record metadata, but it also has shipping list metadata, which can be more granular than catalog records, believe it or not. So it goes back and forth. So there's that webinar. We have a whole list of PDF tutorials there. And if you need more, you just need to ask me and I'll see what I can do to come up with some more. And again, I apologize. I literally just got some uploaded today. So some of these are brand new. But I will say this, I added 4 tutorials not too long ago today, and most of them actually don't specifically deal with FDM. They deal with how to take metadata in a catalog record and how to massage the data in MarcEdit. So some of those tutorials are actually usable even if you're getting your catalog records from GitHub, or it's potentially usable even if you're working with your own ILS export. So take a look at the tutorials to see if MarcEdit may be of use for whatever your project is. If you're interested in GPO cataloging, I gave you a link there at the top to the GPO's FDLP Academy training repository. So we have a tag that's all about GPO cataloging. So if you're interested in CGP tutorials or GitHub tutorials, these are things that are going to be short recordings for the most part, but there's also longer webinars if you're interested in that as well. So again, I gave you the link to that training there. If you're interested in exploring OCLC, OCLC did a webinar back in September. It was a very good webinar. And they went over how to turn on the knowledge base if you want to get all the records, or how to set up a custom record delivery. And they actually had somebody in that webinar who had just recently undergone that process. And so she walked through what she had to do to get it configured for her system. She still chose to have, OCLC do some customization, but she also chose to do some customization in MarcEdit separately. And she had reasons for doing it. So it's kind of interesting to hear her explain why she chose to do it the way she did. It's very helpful to hear somebody walk through it. If you are interested in just cataloging in general, in October, we had our fall depository conference, and there was a lot of concern or angst, I should say, anxiety about the end of Marchive that was coming up. And so people were batting around ideas about what they were thinking about exploring or about what they had just explored. And people were starting to report out what they were finding and some of the stumbling blocks that they were encountering. And it may help you to see what everyone else has already gone through, just to have a heads up. All right. So I'm pretty much through my slides. What I wanted to do was to give you a heads up about next week, where I had planned on talking about how to use FDM to get catalog records or shipping list records, to download that stuff, and how to massage the metadata so that you could do various projects like weeding and inventorying, and how to do call number conversion projects and so forth. As you can see, though, if you understand that we started cataloging in 1976, and we have pockets of material that predate 1976, you're starting to understand where some of the limitations are with using metadata produced from a GPO source. That said, I can walk you through how to use FDM to get metadata, but the process to use MarcEdit or to use Excel to do some of these tricks can be applied to metadata acquired from other sources. So it may still be worth it to you, even if you're trying to catalog or do work for material that's outside of what we're able to provide at GPO. And I can also do, I have a week. So if you have other things that you want to see me demo, particularly if you know that I just rolled out some MarcEdit tutorials, if you want me to demo that, I can also do that.